Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Brock. I'm the CEO at Open UK, and we're the industry organisation for the business of open technology in the UK. And open technology is open source software, open hardware, and open data. This is the first of our autumn episodes of State of Open Subset, a spin off from State of OpenCon, a series of digital talks which span the range of our different tracks at State of OpenCon. And this first of our autumn series is also the 10th State of Open Subset talk. And today I'm delighted that we're welcoming somebody who wasn't able to make it across to State of OpenCon back in February 2023, Anita Ihuman. And Anita is a developer advocate and technical writer on the Chaos project. Today, Anita's going to talk to us about open source DEI, a subject dear to many of our hearts. And she's going to talk about transitioning from intentions to impact. Now, we very much hope that Anita will be with us at State of OpenCon. And if you haven't already submitted, do remember that you should be submitting your CFPs very shortly to that if you would like to be included in the content at State of OpenCon, SUCON 24. And with that, over to Anita.
Hey everyone, my name is Anita Ihuman, and I'm really happy to be sharing this topic with you today. A brief story behind this topic. At the Chaos community, we've developed a bunch of metrics, most of which are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But one day we decided to ask ourselves, how do we know if we're actually making impact with these metrics that we've developed? And this led us to starting a research, and that brought about this topic, open source DEI, transitioning from intentions to impact. So a little bit about me. I am Anita. I am a developer advocate and technical writer, contributing to notable communities like Chaos community, where I'm currently leading the DEI research to help us understand our metrics. I'm also a community manager at Layer 5 and contributing to other communities like Open Collective and the Good Docs project. And so during this section, we're going to talk about the difference between intentions and impact. We're going to move further to look at the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion in open source. We're going to look at the role of DEI metrics and strategies to foster DEI, then best practices for recruitment, retention, and support. Then finally, we're going to look at examples of some open source projects that are leading and championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's get into it. Now, first and foremost, the topics of intention and impact are like two things that lots of people use interchangeably, but they both mean very different things. Intention simply means how you feel and what you mean to do. And so you could mean to say something, you could want to do something, you could have like thoughts and plans towards a particular thing, but at the end of the day, the mode of execution would be completely different, and the outcome would also be completely different from what your intentions were. Whereas impact, on the other hand, simply is how you make others feel and the outcome of those actions that you're actually trying to make. So now we've seen that these are two different things that are often used interchangeably, but the aim is we want to be able to make the impact or actually make changes with what we have planned or what we have thought through. Now, there's so many open source projects that are currently commencing diversity and inclusive programs in their communities to drive more engagement, particularly from underrepresented groups. However, the outcome for most of these often says otherwise, and this leads so many persons to ask the question, what did we do wrong, or are we not making enough effort? And so let's look at the current state of DEI in open source. Most recently, the Linus Foundation launched a research focused on diversity and inclusion in 2021, and during that research we were able to see that 82% of participants actually indicated that they feel welcomed in their open source communities, which is a great number, right? 82 out of 100 is actually good progress. But then 18% actually said otherwise. And what we're so concerned about is that 18% that didn't indicate that they feel welcome. So what was the reason? Let's see the outcome from this 18%. And we see that it's 23, sorry, 38% of non-binary persons actually do not feel welcomed. People of color indicated they don't feel welcome in North America is 28%. Women goes for 26%. People with disabilities goes for 25%, and 18% study average, and then finally 15% of men indicated that they do not feel welcome within their communities. Now there's so many reasons why, but we can still say that every community can generally be viewed as friendly in one way or the other, depending on whom we may ask. We may ask these questions, and that is why we can't completely say, okay, this is the general overview of open source data, but then based on the audience that this research was focused on, we can see that there is still so much work that needs to be done in terms of getting people to feel welcome within the open source communities. And so we also saw that 30% of participants indicated that the code of conduct cannot be enforced within communities. 36% have experienced some form of stereotype in one way or another. 18% have experienced language barriers while collaborating. 17% still feel excluded and like they do not belong within their communities. And then there's this 2 times violent threat towards women, non-binary, LGBTQ plus, and people with disability, whereas 3 times violent threat to people who identify as transgender. And most persons with who identify as underrepresented do not generally feel welcome, as we have seen so far. And cases of microaggression through insensitive jokes, racism, sexism are some common things that a lot of persons reported to be experiencing in their open source communities. Now, this tells us that even with all of the DEI efforts and intentions that people have and are trying to put out there, there's still so much work that is left to be done and that still needs to be put in place. But then let's look at challenges that are actually hindering this DEI in most communities. First, let's talk about conscious and unconscious bias. Now, one of the biggest challenges in achieving DEI and making actual impact is the resistance to change amongst us humans. Now, some persons feel uncomfortable when it comes to adapting to new environments, getting on board with new practices and beliefs, and this often hinders the progress generally in terms of diversity and inclusion, because it ends up showing itself in form of stereotype and microaggression that a lot of persons have reported to experience. Another is the lack of data. Now, another challenge is how the lack of metrics and data to measure the progress of these DEI goals and leads a lot of communities to the same point which they started. You make efforts, you make plans, and at the end of the day, because you didn't retrieve the data, you didn't use the right metrics, you do not actually have what to use to measure if you're making progress, if there's a place that you're hitting a blocker, and how to actually go back to the drawing board and work on this. And so many persons are left confused when it comes to topic of diversity and inclusion because of this. And then there's this topic, this challenge of lack of representation in leadership, where to create to create actual diversity and inclusion, even the leadership has to be as inclusive as possible. However, most communities today still struggle with this, in the sense that we experience homogeneous leadership in most cases, and if the leadership board is not inclusive, the entire community will eventually get affected by it, and the progress will either be slowed or even be non-existent at the end of the day. Another challenge is the lack of multicultural interaction, where we see that some open source communities have this culture that is unwelcoming and hostile to some persons, specifically those that are underrepresented or identify as minority groups. Now, this leads to burnout, cases of turnover, and the negative impact upon the community at the end of the day. And this affects so many individuals, even the community at large. Now, we also see another challenge, which is the insufficient resources. Now, we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big topic, and leading on this kind of project requires a lot of funds, a lot of hands involved, and a lot of effort. But most communities are not able to actually lead this because they do not have that resources, neither do they have the the capable hands to lead these programs. And so this leads it back to the start point where you have the intentions, but it's really hard to actually accomplish these intentions at the end of the day. And another challenge is the no sufficient technical skills and knowledge, where so many persons are aware of what they want to do, they're aware of how they're supposed to do it, but the mode of execution is really poor because there's very little to no knowledge and skills in terms of how diversity is, how it should be executed, and the best ways that it should be executed to actually get that outcome that we're talking about. And so now these are so many challenges, but then the question is, how do we improve this? Well, that is where the topic of metrics come in. And so the chaos community has developed a bunch of metrics, just like I said, and most of these metrics are currently used as an indicator for the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the goal is to help open source communities and organizations improve the state of DEI outcomes and progress towards all that they're doing within their communities. And generally, what these metrics are trying to help you, or the question these metrics are trying to help you as a community leader answer is my community inclusive, and if not, why? Does my project encourage healthy communication and collaboration, and if not, how can I work towards that? Do we have a valid public code of conduct? Does our project have does our project do a good job at being accessible, and how inclusive are our leadership practices? And then are our events associated with my project also inclusive? So most of the chaos DEI metrics try as much as possible to provide answers to most of these questions that community leaders have. We currently have metrics that span across different areas and aspects of open source. We have under event diversity, where so many events have been badged so far, and we have seen great progress from these communities, including things and trying to adopt processes like the diversity access tickets, family friendliness at events, public health and safety at events, event location inclusivity, time inclusion for events, and so much more. We also have a metric under DEI in governance, where we look at the board and council diversity. We talk about the code of conduct for projects, and then under leadership, we have metrics that look at inclusive leadership, mentorship, and also sponsorship. And for project and community, we have different metrics that look at the chat platform inclusivity, documentation accessibility, discoverability, as well as usability, and so many others like project burnouts, demographics, and also psychological safety for our contributors. Now, we're also trying to expand on most of these metrics, but then these metrics, you might be wondering, why do we have these metrics and why are there so many? The answer to this is simple. These metrics are currently used, we're working towards using these metrics as a benchmark against industry standards. We're working towards using these metrics to identify disparities that exist within most of our communities. We're working towards using these metrics to measure the impact of our DEI efforts, and also using these metrics to set goals and also achieve the objectives within our communities in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, by collecting most of these metrics and using these metrics within our community, you can get a better picture of where your community is, where the entire open source space is working towards, and how we can also help improve topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, to achieve all of this, we actually started a research project, just like I said earlier. Now, you might be asking why we started this research project, and the reason is most of the metrics that are developed within the DEI community are tailored towards helping mostly underrepresented groups, and getting them to actually participate in the open source space. Now, by developing these metrics, we're able to actually know if or not they are being able to carry on with all of this with ease. And so we wanted to understand how much impact are our metrics making towards these different individuals. Are we doing the job that these metrics are meant to be doing? And if not, how can we better improve on the efforts that we're actually making? And so we started the chaos interview campaign with underrepresented groups and launched it in October 2022. And since then, we had like over 150 participants, and we tried to carry out the surveys as well as qualitative interviews where we interviewed stakeholders, project leads, maintainers, and every single person that either leads topics around diversity and inclusion in open source or identifies as members of underrepresented within their communities. And so we reached out to them and spoke to them, hearing their experiences. We tried to find out if these metrics align with their past or present experiences. We tried to find out whether or not these metrics have been impactful to them at any point in time. And through this, we're able to see that so many open source projects do not have well documented or well defined code of conduct. We're able to see that most of our code of conduct are not properly enforced. We're also able to see that the absence of DEI standards makes it difficult for some communities to actually lead topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion and successfully accomplish it. And to date, so many persons feel scared and always hide behind their cameras and are unable to express their true identity because they are worried of what may happen to them when they do so. And thanks to the efforts of members within the chaos community, Matt, Georg, Sean, and Armstrong, and myself, we have been able to put together this research, and the aim is basically to help us understand how this DEI is practiced within open source communities on a day-to-day basis, to see if there is a way we can improve on our metrics to make them more solidified and more impactful to these different individuals, particularly those that identify under minority groups. We want to be able to also improve on our existing DEI metrics and our approach towards developing new DEI metrics as well. And we are working towards wrapping up this. So once the results are done, I'll definitely be sure to give you more updates on that. But now, looking at strategies that we can use to foster diversity and inclusion in open source, some of these are based on the feedback we've gotten from our research, and others are based on like experiences that we've got from open source community members at large. We can see that practicing allyship is the first way we can work towards actually improving our diversity, equity, and inclusive efforts. Now, this is because we will be able to show through actions and not just words that we actually support these individuals in the best ways possible. And this means standing up for every single person in our communities or friends around us that identify under minority groups, recommending them for great opportunities, being their spokesperson in places where you see that they've been talked down on, and so much more. And you can also do that through accessibility audits, where you try to work on your softwares, your documentation, and also resources to make them inclusive in terms of even language and in terms of usability. You can also try to encourage leadership and representation within your communities. You can also try to be open to feedback from these individuals. I know that it's difficult to actually hear what you're doing wrong from the person that is being victimized. However, opening up to receive this feedback is the best way to genuinely know what it is that is wrong and how you can actually tackle this. And so create and enforce the code of conduct in the best ways possible. Collaborate with other communities that are leading these DEI efforts. Now, there's so many that I'll be mentioning shortly that are currently doing a great job in terms of championing diversity, equity, and inclusion that you can also work with to make this effort more impactful. You can also educate more persons on topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly members of our community, because it's not like people have not heard of it, but then there's so much that is missing in the details that makes people just assume when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about gender, but it goes far beyond that. Then you should also try to provide support and resources that can also get more persons intrigued and interested in participating within open source community at large. You should consider inclusive language scans for your software to make it more inclusive to every single person. In situations where the language is a barrier, you could also consider making the language as inclusive as possible. You should foster a welcoming and respectful open source environment for every individual through onboarding practices and so much more, and then leverage on DEI metrics to actually make all of this become a reality. And then finally, we should let the data that we have gotten from all of this to inform our decisions at the end of the day. And best practices that we can take into consideration when it comes to recruitment, retention, and support of underrepresented groups include carrying out outreach programs to underrepresented groups and reaching out to these, providing opportunities to them to get involved in open source community. Now, this includes carrying out workshops, hosting events, meetings, and also mentorship programs. You should also consider developing inclusive onboarding culture in such a way that if I get into a community, I am not worried that, okay, the first person that I got in contact with gave me a terrible experience, and so I don't have to come back to this community because the entire community is not inclusive. But you should try to develop that inclusive onboarding system that every single person actually can benefit from. You should try to provide mentorships and training. I know there's so many programs like Outreachy, Google's season of code, and Google season of docs, and summer of code. But we could also put up more internship programs that help to support these individuals. We should also try to offer flexible schedules for the different time intervals. Now, I know that there's communities that actually try to make their meeting times as inclusive as possible, but there are still communities that people come for to say, I'm not able to be involved in this community because the time zone is not convenient with mine, and so I always miss out on the meetings and all of that. So we should also try to look out for situations like that. We should provide equal opportunities in terms of leadership to people that are trying to get involved in our communities. We should also recognize and celebrate diverse contributions at every point possible and promote awareness and mental health wellness for maintainers and also contributors that are making efforts to keep our communities going. And some examples of notable communities that are doing a great job in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion include the All-in project that currently is leading the project DEI badging, in partnership with the chaos community, the inclusive naming community that tries to watch out for inclusive languages in our documentation, in our repositories, and all. We have the chaos community that is currently developing more and more metrics to help us in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then the software development diversity and inclusive community that is led by the Linus Foundation as well. And all of these and so much more are some of the communities that are putting in effort to see that, okay, in terms of diversity and inclusion, we have people that are taking account all of this and are making effort to improve the state of things. And to sum up, I like to say that it's in a fast-paced environment like open source communities, it's really difficult to achieve the topic of diversity and inclusion in a year or two. But with the efforts of every single person, it's possible to actually make this or transition this from just what we want to do, how we want to do it, to actually doing it at the end of the day. And we can do that by addressing the elephant in the room from the top of the funnel, which is acknowledging that yes, our communities today, most of our communities today they are not actually inclusive or are far behind in terms of diversity and inclusion. We can do this by also realizing that while some persons are aware of this topic of diversity and inclusion, some persons have decided to be blind to the topic and choose not to even make efforts towards it at all. And we should also consider embedding inclusion towards the beginning of our planning phase in terms of projects planning or even events planning, and not at the end of our efforts at the end of the day. So thank you so much for listening, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them. If not, you can connect with me on social media platform on Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can also email me at charlesanita403@gmail.com.
Anita, thank you very much. That is a topic, as I've said before, that is very dear to my own heart. And it's one that at Open UK we view as central to everything we do. We don't spin off DEI as something that's separate from our work. It's central along with sustainability in all of our work. And in fact, when we set up State of OpenCon for the first time in 2023, we were lucky enough to have a Chaos Project Gold Medal. So we'll be working with Anita and the team at Chaos on that to make sure that DEI is met at the gold level standard for our next conference. I'm really looking forward to next week's talk. One of our Open UK ambassadors, Michael Cade, a good friend who is also the Global Field CTO and lead technologist for cloud native and open source software at VM Software, will be joining us. Michael will be talking to us in quite a technical talk about data consistency and recovery operations on Kubernetes. So for all of you technical buffs, that is definitely one for you. And it's something that I know I'm going to learn a lot from. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.